Every year for almost 50 years now, Congress has gotten together and passed a bill to fund the Department of Defense. It always passes, and the president always signs it, and the Pentagon gets a whole bunch of money. That's the way it generally works. But this year, the bill to fund the Defense Department also became the bill to require that people suspected of terrorism, potentially including American citizens captured on American soil, people suspected of terrorism be put into military custody, where they could be held indefinitely without trial. So here's your Pentagon budget, but we're going to go ahead and take the Sixth Amendment off your hands. Why should the bill to fund the Defense Department also have to be the bill that codifies and expands and cements indefinite imprisonment without trial? The Obama administration responded by saying, well, it shouldn't. They said essentially, no way, that's not going to be in the bill. The White House threatening last month to veto the entire defense authorization bill over this new lock them up and throw away the key set of rules that were included in the bill. Tons of administration officials have spoken out publicly against this thing at various times over the last couple of months. Defense Secretary Leanne Panetta, Jay Johnson, who's the top lawyer for the Defense Department, John Brennan, the president's top counterterrorism advisor. They've all said that this detention provision would hurt counterterrorism efforts. The director of national intelligence, James Clapper, saying these limitations could deny our nation the ability to respond flexibly and appropriately to unfolding events, including the capture of terrorism suspects. With all that pushback, House and Senate negotiators got together and tweaked that part of the bill in the hopes of avoiding a presidential veto. Monday night, they announced they were all done. The House and Senate together did make a bunch of changes to the legislation. Now, there's been a lot of confusion and some disagreement as to whether the changes they made actually fix the problem, actually deal with the concerns voiced not just by law enforcement and the intelligence community and the White House, but also by civil liberties and human rights groups. And all the way through yesterday, the White House wasn't weighing in. There was no word on whether their threat to veto this big bill still held. Meanwhile, two retired four-star Marine generals wrote an op-ed in yesterday's New York Times in which they called this thing, quote, both misguided and unnecessary, saying members of Congress who put this forward were, quote, all too willing to undermine our ideals in the name of fighting terrorism. They should remember that American ideals are assets, not liabilities. Just this morning, the FBI director told a Senate committee that he still has concerns about the current language, about the uncertainty that the detainee language could create from this bill. So there's going to be a veto, right? Actually, no. This afternoon, the Obama administration said that they wouldn't veto. Press Secretary Jay Carney saying the White House is still concerned that this is going to create uncertainty for counterterrorism efforts, but enough changes were made to satisfy the demands the administration had made that caused him to threaten to veto it in the first place. So the House passed the defense bill this afternoon. The Senate is expected to vote on it this week, and the president is no longer threatening to veto it. So the big open question here is, did those changes resolve the big constitutional concerns the White House and all these other people had? Is that why the veto threat was rescinded? Or is the White House signaling that they're going to be okay with letting these concerns slide? How problematic is the version of the bill the president's actually going to sign? Joining us now is somebody who is on one side of this argument, Jamil Jaffer. He's Deputy Legal Director of the ACLU. Mr. Jaffer, thanks for being here tonight. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Did the changes to this bill substantively affect your concerns about its effect on civil liberties?
No, I think it was an awful bill before, and it's an awful bill now. It's a bill that would make permanent in American law this fixture of worldwide indefinite detention without charge or trial. It's a bill that would further militarize counterterrorism policy. It's a bill that would make it harder to close Guantanamo. It has all the problems that we identified earlier, and it's really quite astonishing and disappointing that President Obama is withdrawing his veto threat.
What is the difference from the perspective of somebody who was picked up on suspicion of terrorism? What would be the difference in being treated as somebody who's in military custody versus somebody who's being treated in the normal court system?
Well, there are all sorts of human rights ramifications of military custody, but I think that it's worthwhile to focus on the national security ramifications, because as you mentioned, many of the people who have objected to this language are people who have national security credentials. These are the president's most senior national security advisors who spoke out against the bill, and they spoke out against the bill in a form that is substantially similar to the bill we've got now. And they weren't objecting on human rights grounds. They were objecting that these provisions, this militarization of counterterrorism policy, was a national security problem. And it is a national security problem. If you look at the effectiveness of, for example, military commissions at Guantanamo, and you compare them to the effectiveness of Article III courts, ordinary federal courts inside the United States, I think it's quite obvious that the ordinary federal courts are much more capable of adjudicating prosecutions, of presiding over of terrorism prosecutions. And you see that across the board. And you see what you see if you look at the statements from people like Petraeus and Panetta. What you see is that a lot of the power that's being invested in the military is power that the military doesn't even want. And so there are all sorts of human rights reasons to oppose this legislation, but there are national security reasons to oppose it as well.
Are there stated policy aims of the Obama administration that would be blocked if the president signs this? Closing Guantanamo, you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to make it much harder to close Guantanamo. It's also going to create all sorts of problems for the United States abroad, because the powers that we are claiming are not powers that other countries are very happy with. And ultimately, in order to have an effective counterterrorism policy, you need to have other countries that are willing to cooperate. And this theory that we have indefinite detention authority, the power to detain people picked up anywhere in the world without charge or trial until the end of hostilities, whatever that means, that's a power that many other countries are uncomfortable with, and that many people here in the United States are uncomfortable with. And even the Obama administration, we thought, was uncomfortable with it until today. But apparently President Obama was willing to go to bat for presidential power. He objected to the original version of this bill because it was too constraining. And now that the president has got a bill that is somewhat less constraining, he is withdrawing his objection. But the human rights concerns remain, the national security concerns remain. The only thing that's been solved is this problem, if you think of it as a problem, of constraints on executive power.
Jamil Jaffer directs the National Security Project at the ACLU. Thanks for helping us understand this. I have a feeling that that this story is not over and there's going to be more out of Washington.
No, I think this debate is just going to move to the courts now.
That's right. Jamil Jaffer, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. All right. Best new thing in the world tonight, coming up next with a twist.